I'm Richard Raiswell in the Department of History, and I'm one of the editors of a new collection entitled The Devil in Society in Premodern Europe, with a colleague of mine, Peter Dendel, who's from Penn State.
And so this is a collection of essays. Where do they come from?
Yeah, it's a collection of 17 essays. It's based upon a conference that Peter and I put together in 2008, which we held at the University of Toronto. It was a really big conference. There were about 100 people there. We had people from 16, 17 different countries, and lots of Europeans, Americans, even people from as far away as India. So it was a really big deal. And then after the conference, we invited all the participants to rework their papers, to rethink about them, to expand them, and to submit them for publication in a volume. And we got about 40 submissions for the volume, and we scaled that back to 17. And the result is still a rather large book. It's quite a weighty tome.
So within the 17 essays that are there, I mean, what are some of the themes? What is the devil?
Yeah, this is what's such a fascinating problem. There's whole piles of opportunities for people to make different devils in the pre-modern period, and by that I mean sort of before 1650-ish, because the source texts are so very, very vague. If you think about the Old Testament devil, the devil in the book of Job seems to be working with God. So he seems to be collaborating with God, and that's a bit odd. But then if you turn to the New Testament, then we're told that the devil's a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Well, how do you reconcile those? I mean, they do seem to be contradictory. But even if you think about the devil as God's opposite, well, what exactly does opposite mean? God is perfectly good, all right, so the devil's evil, but God is also all-powerful, so does that mean that the devil is actually impotent? Well, that's a problem. So how different cultures, different traditions at different times across Europe rework the devil says a lot about their sort of cultural needs at any given point in time. Because the devil can be used to fill all sorts of gaps, cultural gaps, and plug them into he has a very important social role as a result of that.
So tell me about some of the different devils that appear in this book, or the different incarnations and how people see
well,
the devil.
we divided up the devil into 4 different sort of conceptions. Working with this idea of contrariety, we argued that the devil, you can almost plot devil belief onto sort of a grid, and 4 different quadrants based upon how powerful the devil is and how opposed he is. So you've got really powerful devils who seem to be working with God. You've got really powerful devils who seem to be working against God. You've got devils who've got no power and they seem to be opposed to God. And then in the final quadrant, you've got devils with no power who seem to be working against God. So we divided the essays up into those 4 different quadrants, depending upon what sort of role that they play. And each of those devils plays a different cultural role. I mean, the very, very powerful, very opposed devil is probably the one most people are familiar with. That's the devil who shows up in the Manual of Witch Hunters and things like that. But the devil who has very little power but who is opposed to God is probably the devil who shows up at the end of Dante's Inferno, where the devil is described as not moving, he's trapped in a case of ice. So he's playing a different set of roles. So we organised the papers around that sort of rubric and started to think about them in that sort of context.
Tell me about your contributions to the book. You wrote some in this as well.
Yeah, I wrote a very long, probably too long, methodological introduction. It did go on for a bit. And, but as the editor, you are allowed certain perks. Anyway, so what I did was just do a basic précis of the evolution of devil belief from very early Christian times until the period the book closes, around about 1650. So just sort of summarise the evolution of devil belief and how different groups have reworked him and used him for different ends. And then Peter and I co-wrote the epilogue where we started talking about the 4 quadrants of devil belief and outlining that.
How does the different incarnations of the devil reflect the different cultures of different times?
Yeah, this is a really interesting paper. This is a really interesting problem. I mean, in one of the early papers that we've got by a scholar from the University of London, Sophie Lunn-Rockcliffe, she talks about the appearance of the devil in early art, and that there's a reluctance to depict the devil in early art because sort of limiting, drawing him as a picture or as a painting or even in a mosaic or something, sort of limits him. You confine him to space, and so he becomes less frightening if you can say the devil is actually there as opposed to everywhere. So there's some reluctance to that. So that reflects sort of very early sort of sense of the devil. But then you've got devils who show up in, say, the 12th, 13th century, where he's used almost as a tool by preachers to just sort of prompt people towards moral correction. There's various devils associated with minor sins, gluttony and overconsumption of various sorts of things, and sex and so on. And devils are used as a way of sort of keeping people on the straight and narrow, so he's actually used as a didactic tool by preachers. And then you get to the period of the witch hunts, where the devil becomes all-powerful, all-consuming, and probably too consuming, because he becomes so powerful that he can do absolutely anything. And if he can do absolutely anything, then the whole structure of reality collapses, because it could all be a devilish delusion, and we sort of conclude by suggesting that's how the devil becomes less prominent once he, ironically, becomes so powerful that he can do anything. That's such a devastating critique that you might as well just say, okay, yeah, it could all be a devilish delusion, but in the event that it's not, this sort of seems to work, and so you get science coming out of that as a result.
Very interesting. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.